All right. Hi again, everybody. So I love to see we've got all the coasts represented. We've got the middle of the country. We've got Texas. So great group here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So I will give the quick preamble so we can get into our session. So you are in recognizing our strengths, how librarian skills translate into person-centered management. Hopefully that's where you think you want to be also. Um, we're going to have the presenters introduce themselves in just a moment, but I just will give you a few logistical items before we get started. So the session is being recorded. There are Zoom captions available on the bottom of your screen. If you press the CC button, that should allow you to see those. We'll do Q&A at the end, so please use the Q&A feature for questions as they come up. You can choose to do that anonymously. You can also upvote other questions that you would like to see answered. Our chat is always popping. You can use those for general questions or technical issues. Alyssa is here and will also be monitoring the chat if there's any technical issues that we can help with. And Alyssa is adding some links into the chat. So that includes for our collaborative resource sharing and for our code of conduct. So if there are resources that come up during the presentation that you would like to recommend, please do go ahead and put those in our Calm Resources Zotero or in the chat. And then I think that that is all I need to say. So let me turn it over to our amazing presenters and thank you for being with us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Danny. Hi, everyone. So happy to have you here, and we're so thrilled that you chose to come to this session, this conversation, to end your first day at Calm. So my name is Hailley Fargo. I'm the Associate Dean at Northern Kentucky University, just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. And before we dive into the conversation, we wanted to give you a little bit of a backstory and motivation for us putting this panel together for Calm. So several years ago, myself and Jen Jarson, also on this panel, had one of our many conversations where we talked about a whole host of things, but we had really started to talk about our management style, our management practice. And like many folks, we didn't have formal management training. And so we were talking about, what are the challenges we're facing? How are we navigating them? How are we working together with our teams? And we really felt like we hit on something meaningful that we wanted to explore more. In particular, we really started to talk about the ways in which our teaching and outreach backgrounds really played in and informed the ways that we approached management. And the more we talked about this idea, the more we centered around this idea of these soft skills, skills that we're developing in our daily librarianship work, and then thinking about how those translate into management practices and make us better person-centered managers. And so the scope of the idea has sort of shifted over time, but that's really the backstory for how we landed kind of where we are today. And I'm going to pass it over to Jen.
Thanks so much, Hailley. Hi, everybody. My name's Jen Jarson. I'm the head librarian at Penn State's Lehigh Valley campus and the interim head librarian at Penn State's Schuylkill campus. And I'm just going to pick up with a few additional words of context before we jump into the panel. And Maura, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, so just to say a few more words about the panel's purpose, this idea that Hailley has described about recognizing the soft skills that we developed through everyday librarianship and their centrality to our management practice. This idea felt like it could have wider relevance when we thought about how many of our colleagues also don't have formal management education or training. We saw potential for widening beyond the domains with which we were most familiar, our teaching and our outreach backgrounds. So that's what brought us here, to our desire to discuss this idea in a wider context with respect to wider domains of library work with our excellent co-panelists and with all of you. Largely because we believe that recognizing the prevalence and applicability of such skills in our field will help empower more people to recognize their qualifications for management when they might otherwise think themselves underqualified or underprepared. And we believe reflecting, on these skills and their importance helps us sharpen them further as well, helps us apply them more effectively to our management challenges and opportunities. So in this session, we will be sharing our paths to management roles, how we came to understand ourselves as prepared or perhaps not prepared, as the case may be for management, and how our everyday librarianship skills show up in our management practice. We're also going to invite you to reflect on your own soft skills and person-centered skills and their relationship to your management practice. So with that, we're going to move to our first prompt. If you could advance one more slide, please. Thank you. How did you come to management? So we'll take turns responding to these questions, and I'll pass it to Jennifer first.
Thank you. Yeah, so we're each going to introduce ourselves before we go into our answers to the first question. So I'm Jennifer Gilley. I'm the head librarian at Penn State New Kensington. I've been here for 28 years. The last 5 years, I've been in a variety of interim management roles. My current title is the interim director of the Penn State Campus Libraries Western Region. There are 20 Penn State campuses across the state. And actually, I'm thrilled to announce that I've just been appointed to be the Director of Faculty Affairs starting in July. So I've had a variety of different management roles, thank you, over the last 5 years and going forward. So how did I get here? Well, I'm a little unusual in among our panelists here in that my entire career has been at Penn State. I was hired as a reference librarian right out of library school at Penn State New Kensington, where we only at the time had 4 total employees. So I got to know my coworkers very well, and I also learned all of the processes, everything. When there's only 4 of you, you do everything. So you know how to do everyone else's jobs. When the head librarian left 2 years later, I was very comfortable with the environment and had great coworkers. So I decided to apply for the job, not because I had been intending to go into management, but because it was basically a way of avoiding the risk of having to report to someone new that we potentially wouldn't like. And I felt comfortable managing these employees because I already knew them pretty well. 20 years later, fast forward 20 years, I'm obviously I'm on the career fast track here. 20 years later, after both receiving tenure and being promoted to full, and after building many relationships across the whole of university libraries, I was offered the opportunity to serve as interim director of the Commonwealth Campus Libraries when, once again, my boss was leaving. These are the windows of opportunity for me. Once again, it was a situation where I was familiar enough with the environment that I felt like I could do the job and would rather do it than have to report to someone else. You're seeing a theme here, which I think is actually a pretty common theme among managers. It was also a chance to support and advocate for the smaller campuses, which is a cause I feel passionately about. A period of restructuring ensued. So for the last 5 years, I've been the interim director of various groups of campuses. And then I started dabbling in faculty affairs by becoming the promotion and tenure coordinator, sort of all of those things like on top of my regular job of being the head of Penn State New Kensington. So to sum up, during these 5 years, I learned that I actually love higher ed administration, which I never would have dreamed of when I was in library school and didn't take a class in administration when I was in library school. So the fact that I'm here now is a function of 2 things. One, other people believing in my skills and encouraging me to apply for these positions. And then 2, me having taken advantage of opportunities across those 20 years to grow my leadership skills and but in ways that I didn't realize at the time were leading to a management career. Now I will pass it over to Hailley.
Thanks, Jennifer. My path to management perhaps started, I think, when I was growing up. I often gravitated towards leadership roles because I liked the task of organizing people, of enacting change, leaving something better than I found it, working with others in my community. So I think I always gravitated towards those roles, but management came a little bit later. When I was in graduate school, I supervised residence hall libraries and worked with 12 undergrads who ran the day-to-day operations of that work. And I found that I really enjoyed coaching those students, cheering them on, and also finding ways to connect their passions and interests with the work of the residence hall library. None of those students were pursuing library sciences afterwards, but it was fun to find ways to make those connections. After my time in graduate school, I moved over to Penn State and had a few different roles, but the longest role was the student engagement coordinator, where I did not manage anybody, but did a lot of coordinating. And I think you'll see across my answers in this panel, the coordination element has been really transformative and important in how I think about my managerial work and my managerial style. In the pandemic, I was doing that coordinating. I was enjoying it, but I was looking for a change, to make a change. And I thought that I was ready and I wanted to pursue a management role and move away maybe from some of that coordination. So I ended up at NKU, Northern Kentucky University, and the head of our teaching and learning department. And so over the past 4 years, I really got a chance to practice my management, to supervise a team, to build capacity, to build that departmental capacity and vision for the future, and see that change over time, which I really enjoyed and reminded me a lot of my graduate work. And over the past 2 years, I've been in an interim associate dean role and now a permanent associate dean role. So my reporting structure looks a little bit different, but I now have a chance to support other department heads that are in our library who are newer to management, and I'm actually building some professional development for our leadership team to help grow that confidence for our new managers. And I'm going to pass it over to Jen.
Thanks, Hailley. So I started my career in reference and instruction positions where I did a ton of teaching, not surprising. And I also, like Hailley, did a wide range of coordination style work too. For example, I worked with different stakeholder groups to develop and direct a lot of information literacy curricular initiatives, assessment initiatives, to plan large scale events and so on. And all of those experiences were very meaningful to my management development in essentially non-titled roles, really. But I want to mention specifically a very significant experience I had in a titled role that was very influential. During a period of organizational change, like others have alluded to, at my former institution, we decided to implement a rotating head model for our department. So we took turns leading our team of colleagues while continuing with our primary responsibilities. So these were 3-year terms of service, and the role was shared among 4 people. Our department also included some additional folks who didn't participate in the rotation. And that work as a rotating head included supervision, of course, advocating for my unit colleagues, facilitating communication and decision-making within the unit and across other library units, collaborating with unit heads on policies and procedures and the like. And this rotating model afforded me what I feel is a pretty unique perspective on how to effectively lead and manage a team of colleagues. Through that experience, I came to see that I found that work interesting and I wanted to do more of it. And that's what led me to my current position. So I was hired as the head librarian into a pretty small team at Penn State's Lehigh Valley campus in 2017. And then in 2024, I was asked to take on the interim head librarian role for another small team at Penn State's Schuylkill campus while sustaining my primary role, which I continue to serve in both roles. So the head librarian work includes supervision, staff planning, budget administration, small budget administration, space planning, still some coordination type work in arenas like information literacy, undergraduate research, and direct work in teaching and reference outreach collections, et cetera. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Maura.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everyone. I'm Maura Smale. Currently, I am Chief Librarian at the City University of New York Graduate Center. And I'm going to try to be fast because a lot of what I have to say is very similar to what my colleagues have said as well. I did not go into librarianship seeking management necessarily, though it did end up becoming a goal for me. So librarianship is my third career. After college, I went straight into a PhD program in archaeology, and then I worked in online publishing in several different roles, some of which included supervising small teams. And then I went back to get my MLIS, and my first academic library job was as an instruction coordinator at New York City College of Technology, which is one of the CUNY undergraduate campuses. And at CUNY, the City University of New York, librarians are faculty. So when I got to City Tech, I started on the tenure track as an assistant professor. And it was as I was sort of going along the tenure track that I started thinking more about management. I had some really great mentoring, again, echoing other folks from my boss, was pretty involved in college and university service pretty early on. So that was really helpful. And then I was on my 5th year on the tenure track when the provost of City Tech asked me to take the lead, to be the project director, step in on a large institutional grant. So at that point, that was the biggest institutional grant that the college had. And that really set me up for more formal management within academic libraries. So then when my boss, the chief librarian, announced his retirement, I was 1 year away from tenure. That was not my plan. My plan had been to get tenure and then maybe take a sabbatical and then maybe think about this. But he encouraged me to apply for the position. And similar to Jennifer, I was really struck by, the potential to be in that role rather than have to report to someone new who is in that role. Though I did feel like I wished I had more time. And I had also, my research focus has been on how students use and don't use our libraries. And I also saw that as an opportunity to put that research into practice. So that's how I got where I am today, although today I stayed as chief librarian at City Tech for 8 years, and then I moved on, applied, and got the position of chief librarian at the CUNY Graduate Center, which is the doctoral granting part of the CUNY system. I've been here for about 3.5 years now. And I'm going to pass it on to Hailley.
All right, thanks, Maura. So our second question that we're going to briefly explore is understanding how we realized that we could become a manager and any past experiences that prepared us or didn't prepare us for the management roles. And I'll kick things off. So like others have echoed or mentioned, having I had a former supervisor who told me, Hailley, you're ready to be a department head. And that was something that I needed to hear, that I appreciated hearing to give, myself the confidence to jump into a management role here at NKU. When I got to NKU, I also had a colleague who was a senior associate dean in the library who provided a lot of mentoring and advice and support while I navigated my first moments as a manager, and shared a lot of her past documentation from when she was a department head. And that idea of modeling, I think, was really helpful in preparing me for management, seeing other supervisors do different things and then trying to borrow the best things that I saw across those past supervisors and the things that worked well for my style of management. As I mentioned before, the coordinator role that I had was also really useful because it taught me a lot about how do you build buy-in, how do you create a shared vision, how do you build that capacity over time and not rush to get to something. You take your time to get to those ideas, those objectives that you want, because it takes time to build that collective vision. I think a few things that I was not prepared for, that I think I conceptually knew were coming, but I was not actually ready for them, one was the emotional time and energy it takes to manage a department, to manage people, to work with them and understand what they need and how I can best help them reach their goals and support the department. And so I spent a lot of time learning how to create those boundaries so that my emotional energy was not totally expended at my job, and that I had energy to care about other people and other things outside of my job, my workday. The other thing that I was not quite prepared for was the balance between doing some of that librarianship work that I really loved to do, outreach, instruction in my case, but then being able to balance that to do the really important time and energy of being a manager. So I think when I came into my management role, I really wanted to prove to my department that I could be a good teaching and learning librarian. And I think over time, I really had to shift that mindset of, spending that time and energy managing and supporting the department, and having other opportunities to do that teaching and learning that I loved, but just in a different way. And I'm going to toss it back to Maura.
Thanks, Hailley. So yeah, I would say that each of my previous roles brought something to my management practice now. Really reflecting back now, one of the biggest advantages that I had when I was an archaeologist is that when I was working in the field, I was often supervising volunteers of various ages and experiences doing field work. So that really provided some good experience with multi-generational teams. And I also had some work as a teaching assistant. And in my first full-time librarian position, I was instructor coordinator at City Tech. So I had that classic coordinator experience of coming in to being the person who was scheduling and guiding the work of colleagues who didn't report to me and also outranked me on the faculty rank, right? Because I was a new untenured assistant professor. I will say that the organizational and logistical aspects of supervision and management came more easily for me. I think that's the kind of person that I am. I was absolutely not as well prepared for some of the relational aspects of management. And I think I really worked to develop a more relational and person-centered management style, in part after reflecting on what I didn't want to do and how I did not want people to feel about me. So in my online media work, I had a job where I didn't have a great relationship with my two direct reports. The boss in that job, the large boss of the office, was their leadership style focused on anger and blaming. So that was a good lesson in what not to do. And then later, I had an online media job where it was very team focused, much less hierarchical. We all worked really well together. And honestly, I probably stayed at that job longer than I would have otherwise because the environment was so great. So that really has made me think about like how we can work well together as a team, what makes folks want to stay and do this work together as a team, and how I can encourage them to stay rather than to leave. And I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Maura. So I don't think I ever did realize I could become a manager until in each case, the opportunity opened up and someone above me suggested that I apply. But in hindsight, I can see that various experiences had been preparing me for management, and the sort of reflection we're going to encourage you all to do today as well. So one, some of the experiences that have been preparing me were that getting to know all aspects of the operation, working from the ground up from a small campus, I guess, building relationships across the organization by being involved in committees and eventually chairing those committees, mentoring other employees after I earned tenure is sort of like mini management, and then also serving on P&T committees and then chairing those committees. In all of these ways, I was building up both my expertise and my capacity to serve as a trusted authority. Also, in returning to our theme of, specifically like librarian skills that you don't think of as management skills, in my direct work with students, like direct reference work, when you help students find information, you're working with a whole set of skills that are very applicable to management. You're always practicing skills of curiosity, non-judgment, and support when you're helping someone find information or find resources, but you're also letting them know the realities of the situation. That they may not find exactly what they were hoping for, or the sources that they thought were great may actually not be acceptable. So you're sort of fleshing out the boundaries of acceptable reality when you're working with students, and that's very applicable to management, I would say. Good librarians show patrons the larger picture, and I think good managers do as well. Now I'll pass to Jen.
Thanks, Jennifer. So this question brings two particular veins of thought to mind for me. First, most of my work has really been working closely with colleagues on small teams, whether because that was the size of the organizational unit or because of the nature of a project team that I was on. And that required a lot of collaborative work. The work was really about developing shared vision, shared investment, working together for implementation. And in doing the work, I certainly developed knowledge and skills naturally, as we all do, but I don't mean just in the content area knowledge. I mean, I think that the closeness of the work, the collaborative and small team nature of that work meant I was practicing and developing a lot of those coordination skills and skills to cultivate collaboration, shared buy-in, as well as organizational skills, communication skills, but really these relational skills that we've been alluding to. And that also, I think, sort of engendered a strong sense of accountability that has been, I think, very important in my management path and perspectives. So in doing that kind of work on those small teams, I recognized my effectiveness and success in wrangling it and in the soft skills that helped me be effective in it. And I came to understand my interest in it and in wanting to get better at it too. And I came to see how much I esteemed that kind of work and how much impact and value that work had on individuals and organizations. The other vein of thought that I want to mention is how big a role my experiences in the classroom specifically have played in my management journey. And when I say classroom, I'm referring to one-shots for sure. That's been probably the majority of my instruction experience, but other instructional models too, like sequenced instruction, embedded librarianship, faculty development kind of work too. Like so many of us, I started with very little training in teaching, much like management too. I learned largely by trial and error and from colleagues and through research, of course, again, like many of us. And I don't want to get too sidetracked by talking about my journey to evolve my teaching. That's a whole different talk. But I will say in the beginning, my approach to instruction was largely organized around tools, right, like database navigation, and my methods were largely based in lecture and demonstration. And over time, I experimented a lot, and I made a lot of incremental changes. So, for example, I experimented with constructivist-inspired approaches, informative assessment, and metacognition. And I'm mentioning all of this, although it might sound tangential, because I think it's actually very integral to how I developed skills for management and how I saw myself as capable of management. Partly the techniques themselves, right? The pedagogical approaches and the theoretical foundations of those approaches, those translate and apply to management contexts quite clearly, for me at least. But I think it's also the iterative and incremental approach that I used in my teaching that helped me see my capacity for development and that helped me find meaning and transferability in it. And I think I'm passing it back to Maura.
Yes, thanks, Jen. So I'll kick us off on our third prompt question, which is how do these skills from our past experiences show up in our management practice? So I'll start with the skills that I've had to work on. So again, I said that, some of these are things that I felt comfortable with. I really enjoy puzzles and problem solving, right? And I see the work of managers in part as making sure that my colleagues have what they need to do to be successful in their work. So I've had to really practice with active listening and patience. And I see someone put in the chat curiosity with discussion, right? And slowing things down. I do joke, and I will say that I had this in my plan of things to say even before attending Meredith Farkas's amazing keynote. But I like to say that there is no such thing as a bibliographic emergency. I want to get T-shirts made. We'll think about that. But I really do try to live that in my day-to-day, and especially where we are now in the profession, in academia, in the world. I really think it's important to keep a non-urgent and kind workplace as much as we can. So again, all the things that folks always say not to do, like I don't send email outside of business hours, even if I write it. I don't use the red exclamation point unless it really is red, which is so rare. And we have a pretty non-hierarchical workplace here at the Graduate Center. All of the librarians report to me, and our committee structure really encourages input from everyone. So I really try to build consensus as much as possible, to be transparent. I won't share confidential or personnel information, but pretty much everything else that I can share, I will. And I do that because I've experienced the fear and disgruntlement that comes with not knowing what is happening and why in your workplace, not feeling like information that affected your work is being shared. I also really believe that it's important for folks to know what is happening, because we are not always going to agree all the time. That's just the way it is. So having, at least we can understand why decisions are being made that way. And I really try to foster the kind of workplace that I personally would want to work in. So I'm going to pass it on to Jennifer.
Thank you. So I'm going to start repeating myself here a little bit, but I would say that some of my skills that have shown up are that, I really think that reference librarian skills and mentoring skills can be very much the same. Start with curiosity in all relationships, basically. What is somebody interested in? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And then you provide support and resources to help with those strengths and weaknesses. And then also, you're not unconditionally supportive, because you need to use your expertise to effectively convey whatever the larger picture is in all of these cases. Committee chair skills. I really enjoyed thinking about how many skills are inculcated in being a committee chair. Seeking input from appropriate stakeholders. Giving equal voice to each member of a committee while still steering the group toward decisions that move the work forward. Providing effective summaries and recommendations. Keeping everyone on task. And diplomacy. All of those are really important committee chair skills, and then also really important management or administrator skills. And then finally, just general and know your people. The more you know everyone you're working with, the better you can support them, and also know how everything works. Always be curious about all parts of the operation, not just your corner of it, but as many parts as you have the time to learn about. That's very helpful as well. Now I will pass to Hailley.
Thanks, Jennifer. So a couple of skills that I thought about in reflecting on this question. One is some of my past experience with outreach work and the ways in which you build relationships with folks in the library and across the institution. And that sort of the recognition that it takes time to build meaningful relationships. And in order to really meet your community where they are, you have to know what your community wants. And so I think a lot of those outreach skills have translated into my management practice with getting to know folks on my team, getting to know folks across the library organization, across campus, and then being always able and willing to make a handoff, so connecting folks on my team with other people across campus to help enable that work and move that work forward. I think another element is my teaching background. So I think a lot about facilitation, the ways in which facilitating a class session ties into facilitating conversations in a department setting. And in particular, I've been thinking a lot about lesson plans and the ways in which we set up our class instruction and how that actually translates really nicely into thinking about department meetings. How are you making the use of 60 minutes of time if you're coming together? What are those outcomes, the meeting outcomes versus the learning outcomes? And even thinking about that flipped classroom approach, right? How are you sharing necessary pre-work with folks in your department or unit to think about, reflect on, and then process to come together to make the most of our time together synchronously. And I think the last thing I'll say is I try to do a lot of reflection and really think about what's happened in the past, how I want to use that to move forward, and kind of an eagerness to learn new things, to understand new experiences. And I try to apply that with the folks that report to me and wanting to learn more and being curious and trying to work together the best way that we can. And I'm going to pass it over to Jen.
Thanks, Hailley. I'm going to pick back up on what I was mentioning earlier about the importance of my development as a teacher, building on some of the things that Hailley has been mentioning too, to development as a teacher to my management practice. And I want to focus on one particular example, specifically my experimentation with and adoption of formative assessment, in particular in the classroom. And that was, it's been such a powerful experience for me, thinking more about formative assessment in teaching, but also as a manager. In case you don't have a teaching background, aren't familiar with the term, formative assessment refers to a wide variety of methods used to help both instructors and students monitor and understand students' progress, what they're learning, what they're misunderstanding, where they're having difficulties. So instructors use what they learn through those formative assessments to target improvements to instruction. So it helps us figure out what needs to be reinforced or clarified, what we can address in the moment. It's meant to be very low stakes. It's meant to be quite informal. It's less about the specific tool and more about the way in which it's used. So it's really about the motivation and implementation behind formative assessment. It's really about making things visible and transparent to the students themselves, to you as an instructor. It's about making the instruction developmental and responsive and therefore productive. So as I experimented with using formative assessment, the more success I found with these discrete, let's call them activities, formative assessment activities, as I was using them to structure my teaching, the more I began to see it as an actual way of working, like a broader formative assessment attitude or a lens. And that became so transformational, not just to my teaching, but to my attitude about teaching, because it helped me see teaching was about creating opportunities for students to practice learning and for instructors and students alike to learn from the work and to respond and adapt. And it made teaching and learning more transparent to all of us who were involved. It made it more responsive, as I said, more engaging and more empowering too. It really meant that the teaching and learning process felt more collaborative and co-constructed. And it really cultivated for me an inquiry mindset as an instructor. It helped me approach my students and my teaching with curiosity, as we've mentioned a few times now. And so this is an attitude that I have translated a lot into my management work. It helps me approach conversations with an inquiry attitude, an open and curious mind. It helps me remember to ask first, not just make assumptions. It helps me see my work with a developmental lens and with fresh eyes as an opportunity for exploration and investigation and growth. It helps me cultivate collaboration and shared buy-in and investment by creating on-ramps for others, by inviting contributions and then building on them together, really co-constructing. And I think it helps me support diverse perspectives and pathways by practicing transparency, by considering the different vantage points that we're all bringing to the conversation, the project, what have you. It also helps me feel somewhat, at least, prepared to navigate uncertainty, because I know that I can be flexible and responsive to what's being offered, opportunity-wise or challenge-wise. And because of all that, I think it helps me find value and meaning. And so we're going to take a pause. I'm going to pass it back to Maura for a short reflective activity.
Great. Thanks, Jen, and thanks, everybody. So we're going to pause right now. We have a QR code here. I'm also going to put the link in the chat. And what we'd like to do is invite you to spend some time reflecting. So we have two questions that we've put on a Padlet here. The first is if for folks who either have a manager, which may be all of us, or might want to be a manager, think about your everyday library work. What are the person-centered skills or values that you practice regularly that could translate into a management context? And then if you are a manager, think of a recent situation or interaction with someone who reports to you. What person-centered skills or values came through, and which person-centered skills or values do you feel that you might need to strengthen as you reflect on this interaction? So what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time, just give you, 5-ish minutes, 3 to 5 minutes to just quietly reflect. And if you want to just write things down on your own, that's fine. But yeah, some quiet reflection. I feel like we should play some music or something, but. So I see that folks are already starting to add things to the Padlet. If you are comfortable sharing and you want to add some of your answers to or reflections on either of these questions or both, please feel free to add them in the Padlet. And just to let everybody know that we'll keep this Padlet alive for future reference. So if you want to refer back to it, that's fine as well. And also seeing folks co-signing a lot of these as well. So. And just to share some of these as well, if you might want to be a manager, have a manager, person-centered skills and values that could translate into a management context. I see a lot of mentoring, active listening, radical vulnerability and empathy, absolutely. Being willing to have the hard conversations instead of hoping the problem disappears and resolves itself, definitely. Curiosity, I love seeing that show up again and again. And recognizing and appreciating the work that folks do. That's really great. And then if you are a manager, think about a recent situation. Again, more active listening, strengthening active listening and empathy skills, absolutely. Calmness and flexibility, yes and yes. fantastic. So thanks so much, everybody, for reflecting and sharing and just taking this pause in the middle of the session to think through. And again, we will keep the Padlet up for future reference, and I'm going to pass it on now to Jennifer.
And now we're going to spend a few minutes thinking about advice for each panelist sharing advice we would like to give, and then there'll be questions time after that. So be thinking of all the questions you have for us. So what advice would you give to people who are aspiring to be managers and or to current managers who want to reflect on or grow their skills? So I'll start. For aspiring managers, I would recommend building relationships across the operation. That's so important. Look for service opportunities, chair committees. This is how people get to know and respect you. Keep an eye on the bigger picture. Stay current with library news and higher ed news beyond your organization, throughout society. This is a huge one right now. It's hard to have a management vision if you aren't aware of what's going on in the larger world and what people might be going through. And then finally, communicate your vision upward. If you have ideas, that's great. Communicate them upward to your management, but also be flexible when you don't get your way. But be sure to let people know that you have a vision. Advice for current managers. Be curious about your team. Why do they feel the way they feel? Why do they act the way they act, each individually? I love someone in the Padlet put the reference interview. Exactly. Like, why is the person asking this question? Why is somebody in your workplace upset about this particular thing? Try to be curious about that. Be an active mentor. Reach out and elevate others any chance you get. Be transparent about the bigger picture, even when people don't want to hear it. And I've learned this lesson 100% in the last year at Penn State, because we've had a bunch of campus closures. It was announced about a year ago that 7 campuses would be closing down. And what I really learned from a management perspective there is that people do want to hear the truth. They don't want you to be optimistic if optimism is not warranted. They want to know what the real truth is going to be. And then finally, as a manager, have a vision and use it to inspire. Now I'll pass to Hailley.
Thanks, Jennifer. I have 2 pieces of advice, and I think the first piece of advice that I found really valuable in stepping into a management role is finding other managers in similar roles at other institutions. And so that could be, you're a new manager, you're looking for community, or even if you're an aspiring manager and you find other people at other institutions who are also interested in that. I think CALM is such a wonderful conference to make some of those connections, to get to know folks. And I am always a believer in sending a cold email if you need, to say like, hey, I want to chat. I want to learn more. I want to talk to you about management. And that having that community, being a manager can be isolating sometimes, especially when big things might be happening in your library or on campus. And so having a trusted network of other managers at other institutions who can share their perspectives, you can swap ideas, and you can ultimately celebrate successes and wins as you experience them. And I think my other piece of advice for folks in management roles is to remember that being a manager takes time, and that you're always, I feel like as a manager, I'm always stretching, I'm always practicing, I'm always learning, I'm growing. Sometimes I'm practicing things that are really hard for me and really difficult, but it's important. I remind myself that it's good to practice, it's good to try those things, to reflect, and then ultimately to know how to take care of yourself when being a manager is a lot and you need a moment to just take a step back and take care of yourself before you can go back to caring for your team. And I'm going to pass it to Jen.
Thanks, Hailley. I want to echo what others are saying. I too think being connected is incredibly important. Excuse me. I recently participated in a professional development program for department heads and other kinds of middle management type roles. And the facilitator described these roles as the hardest and most lonely roles in an organization. And I think what she was saying was that we middle managers are balancing many kinds of work and have many different responsibilities to many different people. And while that might mean that we're at the hub, positioned at the intersection of many different nodes, which would make us incredibly connected. It can also be a sort of heavy and sort of isolating position. It can mean being pulled in a lot of different directions and feeling accountable to a lot of different interests and priorities. So I think connection can mean being an active and integral part of your ecosystem, but I think, like Hailley is saying, it can also mean finding connection outside of your immediate ecosystem with others with whom you share interests or backgrounds or goals, and maybe less accountability, less responsibility. And that might be professional connections, but it might also be personal connections. It can also mean, I think, identifying what makes you feel connected to your ecosystem, like the value and meaning that it has for you, I think. And on a related note, I just want to double down on, I think, what we've been saying throughout this time about being curious and open. And I think that means curious and open about yourself and about your team and about your connections. And I think part of that means being kind, I think, is what we've also been saying. And I guess what I really want to acknowledge is just how difficult that can be. And I think I saw some folks' comments in the Padlet kind of alluding to this. You know, when you're feeling super overloaded or strapped for time, which I don't want to speak for anyone else, but it feels like a lot of the time for me these days, that can be super difficult to practice, to be open and curious and kind. And I think these two things, this idea of connection and curiosity and openness, are really rather intertwined. Feels to me like practicing curiosity can help us find connection, and practicing connection can help enliven curiosity. And I'll pass it back to Maura.
Thanks, Jen. I almost feel like I don't have anything to add because everything everyone has said is so terrific. But just to add a couple of things, it's really foundational if you're going to be a people-centered manager to be open to discussion and feedback, even if it's negative. And that is something that I do still have to actively practice. I try to do a lot of reflection. I have been in therapy for years, not like everyone else in the city that I live in, right? And I know there's a cost to therapy, and I don't want to make light of that. But if you can get access to therapy or coaching of some kind, that kind of professional development outside of work has really been helpful for me. For me, addressing some of my childhood issues has helped immensely. I'm someone who grew up in a highly conflict avoidant, basically, is how I came out of my family of origin, and that's just not a good place to be in when you supervise folks. I also I've done a lot of and do a lot of bystander intervention, anti-racism and anti-oppression trainings, other kinds of workshops and professional development. And I feel like this is really it's almost like going to the gym. It's like a muscle strengthening activity. Some of these are available freely, right? I know that costs for professional development is always a concern. I want to just give a shout out to Right to Be, which is an organization that does a lot of free online training. They have synchronous training. They do a lot of bystander intervention kind of things. But also, I've been kind of surprisingly impressed by some of the workplace equity modules on LinkedIn, which I did some of for something happening locally, and I was kind of impressed. So, again, I know that our time is always short, just to echo what other folks have said. But when I make the time and the space for that kind of professional development, I've never not learned something new or brought something back that supports my management practice. So I highly recommend that.
Excellent. Thanks, Maura. I think we're ready to move into a Q&A period. And I know some questions are already coming in through the Q&A area. Feel free to add more. And while folks are thinking about their questions, we have a couple that have already shown up. I just want to shout out Elisa's comment in the chat, run towards critique, which I think is such a great framing, an easy way to remember, just a really visceral image. Good language around that. Thanks, Elise. Okay, so as you're adding questions in the Q&A area, or if you have additional comments you just want to share in the chat, please feel free. But I'm going to read out, I'm going to pose the questions that we've received so far and give all of our panelists a chance to respond. So the first question we have is, I think there is a lot of value in the skills and dispositions that we have developed in regards to instruction and reference work. How do we help those who lead above us understand what we do and how our experience has value? Does anyone want to take a first pass at that? Any comments there?
I can just take a pass at this just because I literally just did this recently, which is that the administrators meeting in my institution. I will start by saying that the current president of my institution has a lot of the same kinds of people-centered management practices that we've been talking about today. And how that has shown up on the day-to-day is that we have a weekly meeting and there's an invitation to bring topics to the weekly meeting. So recently everyone knows what the library does, right? But so I took the opportunity to just throw a quick PowerPoint together. Here are the things that we do. Here's some pulled from the ACRL stats, which we've just finished. Here's some facts and figures just to kind of remind everyone what we do across that administrative cohort of folks. So I think, even just asking, can I present about the library for 10 minutes at whatever the meeting is of the folks that you report to could be useful.
And to build off that, one other thing that I'll mention is capturing some of those student stories around students that have been impacted by library services or support, library instruction, library outreach. We, at my institution, we use a form in the library where we capture impact statements is what they're called, but we try to solicit those and then build those stories out. But sometimes it's helpful to have a student face or multiple students who have benefited to connect those things. And I think there are ways in that storytelling to draw out the skills that we have that make those experiences rich.
Thanks, Hailley. I'll just add too that echoing, I think, on what some folks are saying is trying to speak the language of the those who are leading above us and that we're trying to connect. I think we've been talking a lot about sort of principles of transparency and open communication being so important. I think and are making clear, articulating clearly whatever it is we're trying to communicate. We've been talking about that in the perspective of folks that we're managing, but I think those same principles and sort of values can apply in the other direction. And trying to, at least for my part, I can see that formative assessment attitude, that sort of developmental responsive approach being applied in the other direction too, sort of thinking about it in terms of trying to, communicate across boundaries, I guess, and using it as an opportunity to explore what the interests and needs and are of the person who's leading above us that we're trying to communicate with, and trying to frame our message in the way that will make the most sense to them, I guess, is what that brings to mind for me. We have a couple more questions and still a few more minutes, so I'll read out the next one. Do you have any ideas to improve team relationships and or make the workplace more fun? Anyone have a thought to share? And if folks want to add comments in the chat in response to these questions, please feel free. I'll pop the question in the chat in case seeing it is helpful. Anyone have a fun idea to get us started?
I don't know if this is a fun idea, Jen, but one thing that I thought a lot about was the team department meeting structure. And I think when I came into my role, everyone that reported to me had pre-existing relationships with one another, but I noticed that they weren't talking to one another about their work or the ways in which their work intersected. So I tried a bunch of different meeting department structures. And so we eventually landed on like a small share out where people were bringing, here's some things I'm working on right now. But, experimenting with that team structure about the best way. I think one thing that I'm always working on as a manager is when there is a mismatch in team relationships to call it out early and try to work through those conflicts. But that can be, I know sometimes for me, a challenge of if something goes south, how do you catch it as quickly as you can to help build that team bonding.
Thanks, Hailley. Just want to shout out a comment that somebody added in the chat. There's a couple mini golf comments, and it sounds like there's a forthcoming book called Library Jackassery, which sounds amazing and definitely could be inspirational in this topic. Lots of comments about social activities for connecting, puzzle table, food ideas, Smile Awards, first day of school photos. These are very clever ideas. Keep them coming, everybody. Maura,
Yeah,
you.
I just to add that all of this, I try to do some of these things as well, and we are still in a hybrid schedule here, so that has made it challenging to get everyone in the same place. So sometimes they're remote things, sometimes they're again we try to do things sort of in the breaks between. But one of the things that I have done the first day of school's photo makes me think of this is I did a little newsletter a few years ago and asked everyone to, and this is just internal, it doesn't go outside, it's not posted anywhere except for our internal teams, and it has a photo because just given the silos and people's schedules, we just don't necessarily know the folks who are working, the folks who are here mostly during the week don't know the people who are mostly only working on the weekends. So we've been trying to do things like that, and I try to update it regularly as well. Um, and also, I guess one more thing to add, I'm seeing Elise's comment as well. Sometimes it's about just throwing things out there and understanding that not everyone will participate. And I came from a place where the sort of end of year celebration was actually pretty well attended and had a pretty strong. And that has not been the case necessarily here historically. So some of it is me becoming okay with that and thinking of other things we can do for the people who might not want to come to the end of year celebration.
Yeah, I see Elisa's follow-up comment about where, dysfunctional environments, the follow-up being, I meet people where they are and work with those who do get along. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody reminded me of that quote just the other day about how something to the effect of culture eats strategy. You might have the best intentions, the most strategic, initiative, but if the culture is not aligned with that strategy, it can be really difficult. So considering culture in any kind of approach is really important. Um, I think we do have just a few more comments that we want to share to wrap up our slides, but I'll just say maybe we have 1 minute to address one more question. How do you open the conversation for critique with the people you supervise? Is this something that many folks do, or is it difficult if there's no formalized review process? Does anyone have anything they want to say in response to that? And I'll put that in the chat as well for visibility. Open the conversation for critique. It's really hard. Yeah. And I guess the first thing that comes to mind for me, without giving it a ton of thought, has to do with building sort of that, making it feel, building on a relationship of trust. So I think a lot goes into relationship building, maybe before we get to the stage of critique, recognizing that critique can be trying to promote the idea that critique is meant to be developmental. And when it originates from a relationship founded on trust, or at least partially founded on trust, that can feel more safe. That's not very helpful practical advice, but I guess that's sort of the philosophy or the conceptual nature of what I'm thinking about. Anyone else having a quick thought for a difficult topic? Well, I'll just read out the comment that's just come through. I think conversation as soon as possible after the event that is being critiqued is important. It lets you use a light touch, doesn't build up unnecessary drama, be frank but gentle about negative feedback, and quick and sincere about positive critique. Great points. Very helpful. Yeah. That sounds like a topic for another robust discussion. Yeah, Maura, go ahead.
I was just saying that I also think that some of this goes back to, Elise's comment about being a persistent person, right? Persistent and optimistic, it's so easy, and I find myself doing it too, is that it's so easy to get cynical, right? There's a lot to be cynical about right now, but that's sort of like practiced optimism, a thinker that I very much admire, Miriam Kaba, says hope is a discipline, right? And just kind of remembering that and being persistent with it, I think can also help make space to address that.
Great point. Thanks. So in our last couple minutes here, I'm just going to turn it back to Hailley to wrap up.
All right. Thanks, Jen. So we had a really wonderful time with you all over the past hour. And so we wanted to leave you with some reflection questions. These are the same questions that we asked ourselves and have spent the past couple of months thinking about, talking about with one another. And so we wanted to leave you all with these questions for your own reflective practice, to think about these, to jot down some answers. As Maura mentioned, the Padlet will stay open. So if you want to go back to that, please do. But we hope that this conversation gave you a lot to think about and that these questions allow you to take the panel one step farther into your next steps. So with that, I will thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate you, and we hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your Calm conference.
All right. Thank you, Maura, Jen, and Jennifer, and Hailley. Thanks to our audience. As you close out your Zoom, you'll see a little pop-up for the survey show up, but it is also in the SCED. I know the presenters would appreciate your feedback as well. So hope you all have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow at Calm Day 2. All right. Thank you so much.